Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Friday webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about Graph Types 101. This is actually the theme for the month, and really the motivation for using this as our topic is to highlight very much the example files interface that we have now in DataGraph 5.0. And today, specifically, we're going to be talking about basic graph types. I guess the interesting thing maybe for us about even having our title as Graph Types 101 is that DataGraph really does not have graph types in the same way that typical drawing programs do. We have drawing commands that you use to create graph types, and that's maybe kind of a subtle difference, but it is important because if you asked me how many graph types can you have in DataGraph, there's really no limit. A lot of programs will say, well, we have 25 graph types or 50 graph types or something like that. But in that sense, DataGraph is much more like a programming language in that we combine these different commands to create different types. So that's one important point, I guess, to realize. The other thing is that the type or the way that we create a graph in DataGraph is often influenced by the format of the data. So the best command to use, or the approach I might give you if you're asking me how to create a particular type of graph can be different depending on what your data looks like and how it's formatted. So that's just another important point, because DataGraph, in that sense, once you get used to how the different commands work, I think it's a real benefit that you don't necessarily have to massage your data into the exact format to create a particular type of graph. That said, again, we are talking about different types of graphs. In a general sense, today we're going to be talking about line graphs, bar graphs, pie charts, and derivative types of graphs using those drawing commands. And the first one we will talk about is specifically about different types of line graphs. Here we have the new example interface for DataGraph in 5.6. And any of you, obviously, who've gone ahead and installed the new version, you've seen this where you can now toggle between all the graphs that we have here, and then you can toggle between these different types of graphs. And they do get more complicated as you go from one category to the next. And today we're going to focus on the basic category. And I wanted to start again with line graphs. So if you just type into the search panel the word line, and then we'll go ahead and see within the basic category all these different graphs that are here. One of the things that we've been working on, any of you who've been paying attention to these files, we've been updating them quite a bit to try and add more help documentation to help you to understand how these files are created so you could recreate them yourself. Okay, so the first one I want to start here is just the basic line plot. So if you, again, scroll down, you'll see this one here with the title line plot. I'm going to go ahead and open this one. And what you'll notice in this file is that there's a tile now in the top left that says how to create. And we're working on doing this in all of these basic files so that you can see, again, how would you make this, just from if you're new to the program in particular. Hopefully this will be very helpful for new users. But also, one of the things I actually did not realize myself about DataGraph until I used it for a little while was that you have the ability to select columns, pre-select columns before clicking many of the commands to auto-populate the data. So here, for example, in this first tile, which is showing you how to create this, it tells us we can add a plot command and use the menus to select columns, or shows you that we can select two columns and then add the plot command. Let me go ahead and just do that for you so that those of you who, again, are new to the program can see this. So I've added a blank tile. Again, I could just select a plot command. You can do that with the shortcut up above. I can do that with the draw menu, again, new in 5.0. I can add the plot command. If I don't have data selected, my X and Y's say nothing, and I can use the menus to go ahead and select the data, but I don't have to do that. A very quick way to do this is to highlight my two columns, click on my plot command, and now I get my line graph. There's also some other information here in this file on these other, types of graphs that you see with, it's the same graph, but just a little bit more formatting, and wanted to make the point here. This is a really important point, I think, for anyone using the program to understand how to set the size of the graphs. So in many of these files now, we have the simple version of the graph on the left, where it's just showing you the basics. How do you create this form? How do you create this line here? And then in this one, specifically, the size here is set to the automatic setting, which just means I change my sliding bars here. I change the size of the graph, but we also have one that's set to a specific size. And we do that using this size menu here, set to specified, and by default, it's 5 inches by 3 inches. So again, I know if you're a longtime user, you probably are aware of this, but this is such an important point that it's important for people to realize that. If you want to know more information about how to set the sizes, because by default, it will set it to 5 inches by 3 inches. You can set it to centimeters, you can use pixels, and there's a link to a help article here on our discussion board that will give you more information on how to set the size of a graph. Okay, so here's just this basic line plot, again, with the plot command. Here's my data. But one of the important things to recognize, or to know what to do, to really use these files effectively, is to know, well, how can I put my own data in here to replace this if I want to make a graph just like this and I don't want to have to start always from scratch. So what I wanted to do is to just demonstrate that for you now. And I'll go into a spreadsheet, for example, where I have a different set of data. And so if you have if you have some data lying around, you can go ahead and try this. But I'll select these two columns, time and air miles, and do edit, copy. And now to replace the data that's in the two columns that are here, I just select those two columns, and I can now do edit, paste. And it's replaced the data that's in the plot. It has also updated the X and Y titles here, and that's because these are using what we call these tokens. This is set to be the X and Y title that's coming from these particular columns. The title of the graph is something that's been typed in here, so that is not updated. You'd have to update that yourself. But this is sort of the way we're trying to set these up. So these basic files, in some sense, do act like templates. This lets you create this sort of file, but also just showing you how would you do this yourself. And okay, I think that's all I wanted to say on this just basic line graph. Let's move to another type of line graph that's in the example files. And this is one I just uploaded that I thought would be useful to show. This first one, called disconnected lines. If you go ahead and open that one, this again gives you information on how would you do this. And it's basically the same way. If you want to very quickly create this, you select two columns and add a plot command, and it can go ahead and plot this data for you. So what's different here is that you'll notice that there are these two rows within my data set that don't have numbers within the Y column. They just have the word break shown. So the point of this file is to show you a couple of things. One is that, DataGraph has different file types, but here, this is a number column. So when text is typed in, it does show up as red, just to highlight the fact that, yeah, there's not a number here in case you needed to find, where text was. That can be very handy. but there's no reason why you can't put text in here to separate things. So if I, let's get rid of my arrows there, there we go. So if I have either text typed here, or I just have them blank, you know, I don't necessarily have to have anything typed there. If there's a missing value, then it'll do the same thing. And basically it's showing you that there are these disconnected lines here that get created when I create this plot command. What the other thing that we did here is I put in a lines command. So another thing that about DataGraph that I think is interesting is from plotting lines perspective is that there's not just one command for making lines. There are actually really 4 commands that create lines in various ways. And again, the type of line you want to make is you know, using the best command for the tool for the job, you know, what you want to create. So here, for example, if I have this graph, actually I should full screen this so you can see this a little better. I have this graph. Let me zoom this in. And I want to emphasize the breaks between these 2 locations. Well, I can do that using a lines command. So let me just, again, make this very quickly so you can see how fast this is. I can make my plot. I can add points to this. And then the other command that I'm using here is the lines command. And you can see this says draw 1 or more vertical or horizontal lines. So rather than having to manufacture data in the data table to draw these lines, I can add this command and you can type in a single value to put a line in. So there's that line that I just drew, or you can type in a comma separated list. There's that one. So I could have this in the, sorry, or the third way I can do this is by having a column in my data table that has where I want the lines located. So the lines command itself can also be used for representing data in various ways. It has a lot of other options in it, but very handy for just simply adding kind of a reference line within your graphs for annotation is really, really handy. So the other thing that I want to show you here, this last example, this last file, this shows you how if you have missing data, for example, that maybe you don't want a break in the line, rather than having to, again, rearrange my data to remove these sections, I can just go ahead and expand my plot command. And there's an option for bridge gaps in data. If I check this or uncheck this, uncheck it or check it, then you can see how these lines now are drawn between. So very handy if you have missing values to be able to just continue drawing that line. Okay, let's continue to the next example that I wanted to do. So that's a little bit about the plot command. So the other command that I just wanted to point out to you that draws plots of XY coordinates is called the plots command. So this is plural. So similar names, but a different command. And there is an example that we put up yesterday of multicolored line plots. So if you wanted to open this file up, you will see a data set where we have a single X column and multiple Y columns. So this is a big difference between how the plot command works and how the plots command works. So again, depends on what your data set is, what you're trying to do here, but the plots command makes it very easy to highlight a set of data like this. I can go ahead and add a plots command and all my lines are drawn there. So it's different than the plot command, which I can actually make a similar graph with the plot command. Even if I highlight all the data in the same way, I could add a plot and add another plot and add another plot and add my fourth plot. So if I wanted to really format these very differently, that may be the way that you would, do this. But for the plots command, it's just very handy if you want all of these lines done and then to change the color on them, you click the gear menu on the command itself. So this over on the top right corner, there's that gear menu. Click that and you'll get color suggestions that are similar to the color schemes. And then very quickly for all the lines, I can go ahead and change the line width of those. For those of you who are familiar with using masks, both the plot and the plots allow you to mask the data. And just to show this to you here, let me go ahead and expand this, because within the plots command, you can see each line drawn here as a separate data set. These are even draggable. If you wanted to change them, you can move them here. And then when there's a legend added, then that will change. Let's try to quickly show you this, how these are all, again, little objects that even within the command, I can drag around. That changes the order in the legend. And you can add more columns here. You can hit the plus symbol and you add another row into this kind of mini table that shows you what columns are included. So there's some flexibility here. Okay, so that's the plots command. Let's go ahead and move on now to talking about bar graphs, because in the same way that there are the different plots command, we have the lines. Oh, and the connect command. Actually, I guess I did not talk about that too. That's another command for drawing lines. That's very handy. Actually, I'll point that one out. I did want to show you that one too. So the connect command, in the interest of time, I won't even go into this one, but this is, you can see this thumbnail here, this ranking slope graph. The connect command allows you to create line segments where you're connecting two X and Y coordinates. Very handy for this type of an image. So again, could you sort of construct this with a plot command? Yeah, you probably could, but it'd be much easier to do this with the connect command. So if you're interested in that, I'd recommend checking out that file. Okay, now let's talk about bar graphs. And there are a lot of different examples here within the basic bar graphs. But the first thing I want to point out is, again, this difference between these two commands, the bar and the bars. So let's open up this first one. This is a bar graph with fill example. So here's this file, very simple set of data. And again, shows you can select the column of numbers and then you just add the bar command to create this. So if I have a new graph, I have my column of data selected, I can click bar, and then that adds the bar command. Now, I actually can do a very similar graph. If I may add another thumbnail here, if I click my column and click on the bars command, then both of these are up in the top of the default toolbar. So if I click on bars, you get, actually at this point, you get the same exact graph. Now, the difference between these two is how they handle the x-axis, and also the fact that the bars command can do these side-by-side bar charts. Sorry. But if I, just to demonstrate this, let me add in another column here. And if I wanted this to be some type of label, so A, B, C, D. And now, instead of the way that I created the bar command here, let's just go ahead and start new. If I select the label and a value, so I have a text column and a number column to the side of it, and I select the bars command, hopefully you can see this, how the x-axis now is categorical. It shows me those labels on the axis. And in fact, there is still a numerical value behind these. A is at 1, B is at 2, C is at 3, D is at 4. So it's using the row numbers to locate these on the XY coordinate system, but it creates this look of the categorical axis. Whereas for this other command for drawing bar graphs, it's actually very handy when you want to plot bars, or what I call a bar plot, when you have a bar at a particular numerical value within the XY coordinate system. And actually, let me just show you another example that has that more specifically. And this file, just to show you what's in here too, it gives a really nice, I think, demo of the different fill styles that you can use within DataGraph. And the fill, for example, this Perlin noise, this is really sort of a cool fill style. A lot of the commands have fills, and they all will have the same types of options for doing noise or doing gradients or doing lines like this, or just a solid fill, obviously. Okay, but let me go ahead and delete this one and go back now to my list. So let me show you there's one that I wanted to show you here. This is a grouped bars on a date axis. This is maybe a little bit more complicated, but not too bad. This just shows you how what I wanted to illustrate was the fact that the bars themselves are located now on a numerical axis. In this case, it's a date axis. So if I changed my date here, then the location of the bars changes. So this, again, if that's if you want to represent bars, but you want it on a number scale on the x-axis, then this would be the appropriate command to use. If instead, let's go ahead and now go back here. If you were looking to do more side-by-side bar graphs, then there's a number of examples that have that. So here's one that says side-by-side bars. If we open that up, then you can see, again, this one is where we've added this, how do you create this? Well, very simply, you could add the command and manually enter, these columns as what you want to base this on, or you can just select this data and then click your bars command, and there you have your side-by-side graphs. So notice too how this is, in some ways, the plots and the bars are similar because the bars command here has kind of this built-in rows that show you every column that you've added. These are, I believe, really the only two commands that have this type of an interface to them, where you can have more than one or more than two columns of data specified. Well, the pivot command does 3 columns of data, but that's for pivoting the data. Here, you could add as many as you like. If you wanted to have 10 columns included, we could go ahead and do that and select, more of them here. You can see how the bars command can do side by side. It can also do stacked. It can do it on a percent scale. You can also do area graphs with the bars command. So a lot of different things that it can create. But again, it's really meant for this format of data that you have here. I wanted to point out to you this actually example that's right at the top here, this bars and line plot, because this is something that is a very common question for new users is, well, how do I make a bar and a line graph? Because if you just looked at the icons themselves of the different drawing commands, and again, if you click on draw and look here, you don't see something that shows a line on top of a bar as you do in many other programs that do graphing. But here, it's very simple. You just have 2 commands that you add. You add the bars command, and then you add the line plot. So here, this is using 2 different sets of data for each. So this is just, the first one is with the bars, and then the second is literally just clicking on the column, and then we can add the plot command, add points to that, and there I have a bar plus a line. So I've just created that with these 2 commands. Okay, let's see, yes, the last major command that I wanted to talk about here is the pi. So let's look at that. Again, we can go ahead and filter on this. So you can see here, this has pie and donut chart. So this is, I think, a good example of how, again, one command it can do all these different types of charts using various settings within the command. And it is, so we don't have a donut, template versus a pie template. These are all using the pie command. You can see here, to make a very simple one, it shows you how you just select a column of data. So I can just click one column. And then if I go under the draw menu and say I want to add a pie chart, it goes ahead and adds it. Now, one thing about this file is that if you look at the first graph here, this has been set up so that you don't see the X and Y axes. This is also known as a, let's see, if you go under new graph for composition, you can add basically a canvas that's completely blank. And then if you add a pie chart into that, you don't see the X and Y coordinate system. And so actually I can take my pie and just put it on this one, and you can see you can drag it around, but these are also all located within some, there is a location specified that I can change here depending on where I want this. And there's a lot of options for how can you specify where the pie is located. I can do it within a figure. I can specify an XY coordinate if that is something that I need to do, if I want it located within the XY axis. If you do that, then you can still drag it around and you can see the position there shown, or you could type those in. Now here, since I don't have any other command shown, it doesn't really, it's always putting this back in the center. There's nothing else there. It's basically setting the X and Y range depending on where I put this. But if I start with, let's go to this one where I have the coordinate system showing, say I also just plot this data. I can click the data column, make a plot. Now I have a line plus a bar graph. Again, not a built-in template for this per se, but easy enough for me to add these two types of drawing elements, and I can create a graph like this. I guess the only other things that I wanted to point out, one of the commands that is a bit more specialized, but is also in this category of basic, is the candlestick graphs, that you can create these using a stock command. This is, maybe a bit more complex in terms of what's being represented here. This is stock data where we have a date column, we have the open, high, low, and close. And there's some other data here, but this is actually, I thought this was kind of cute data to use because this is when Apple first released the iPhone. This is 2007. So I also added, again, a lines command was added here to create this reference line with the date being shown. This command is slightly different in how it's created because here there is no, even though maybe it would be helpful to have, this doesn't have an auto populate option. You do have to add the command itself. So I can go ahead and add a stocks command, and then you see the menus for each of these, which I could use this menu to do this. This data is in a group right now. So you'd see the name of the group, and then you'd see each of the columns. But this is also something where you could easily kind of drag and drop from the data table. And actually, if I just have the high and the low, it will go ahead and draw the lines. So this is being used for stock data, but there's obviously a lot of other types of data that this could be useful for. But that's all you need to do is just put those in there. And then again, if you have another data set that has the same format, you could just take that data and paste it right into these columns, and it will go ahead and update everything for you. When you do paste over a column, so say, for example, I take this is a numerical column called close. And if I paste this, it's going to really screw up my graph here. But notice how I paste this over a date column. And when it did that, it changed the column type to a number because the column type will change depending on what you're pasting in, DataGraph will interpret the data that's being pasted. Now, it's very easy to change a column type to something else. You can just control click right here on the column itself, and you'll see how you can convert between different data types, or on the object that represents that column, you can convert different data types here. So don't be thrown off by that necessarily. It's actually very easy to swap the data types. It won't change your data at all. What the data type is just interpreting the data. It does not change the data. This is something we've talked about in the past quite a bit with genomic data, for example, that's sort of an issue with that data getting changed when you convert in particular to a date, that it will change the underlying information into a date format, and you can lose what you've actually typed in if that wasn't a date, if you didn't intend it to be a date. Okay, so with that, I am happy to answer whatever questions folks may have. So a question, could you elaborate between how bar and bars handle the x-axis? Absolutely. And maybe the easiest way to do that is actually just start with a brand new file and show you. If I just add some data. If I add this in a bar graph, and I'll do the same thing with a bars command, it actually initially will look exactly the same. So for very simple data, it won't show you anything much different. It's one column of data, it's putting bars, and by default, within the bar command, there is this where option, and this uses the row number. So you can see here, when you see that hashtag in these files, that's referring to that row number, the built-in row number that's within DataGraph. So the default, if you just, again, select one column and click on bar, is it places those bars at the row number, but you don't have to place them at the row number. So for example, I can select another column. I'll just select the same column. And if I do that, it's now placing the bars at that X and Y location. I can, kind of change how wide these are. If I type in more data, it's going to, place the bars along a numerical axis. And there you can sort of see the effect. Now for the bars, again, the one that does the side-by-side graphs is side-by-side bars is one part of it, but to really understand fundamentally what's going on, you can see how this graph didn't change at all. When I change the data, it's placing each one of these bars at the row location. So the x-axis goes up one increment for each bar because I have these in, row one, bar one, bar one, there we go. Bar one is located at row one, bar two at row two. So actually one way to maybe also demonstrate this would be, what if I move these around in terms of the row number? So if you've never done this before, it's very easy actually to move things between rows. If I highlight a bunch of my rows and then I drag that a little bit to the right, then that creates a draggable set of rows that I can then move. So when I did that, notice now how on this bars graph, it moved my bars to the different rows. So now the value that's at 10 is at row 10. And that's how that always works. So to have things at a different location for that command, I would have to actually, I would actually have to drag and move them around, which is sort of silly. I don't want to have to do that. But notice how when I'm changing the location here, this isn't changing at all because the location is set based on that column location. In that respect, it's almost like an XY plot. In fact, if I added another column of numbers, hopefully this isn't confusing. So say this, I want this to be my X, and I'll just have these increasing, type in some numbers. That's what I would do, is I would make this, either have this be my where setting within the bar command, or I can take my two number columns and click on the bar command up here, and it goes ahead and it makes my graph with the bars at those locations. So in that sense, it's almost like an XY, bar plot of data. With the command that's really more categorical, that gives me categories, I wouldn't use it like that. Instead, I may have some labels. That I might have a text column. And so for this command, I can select those labels here, and then that changes my axis to being categorical. But it doesn't actually change the location of where the bars are located within the XY coordinate system. To illustrate this, let me add in one of these lines command. So if I add in a line, I had selected that column, which is a text column, so it didn't actually do anything. But if I add lines at my data locations, you can see how there's a line now at each one of these, and it's showing me those spots. Or in other words, if I want to put a line at 3, then it's at that location. So the C here is at X3. It's at the row value. So I don't know. I hope that maybe I'm beating a dead horse with this. I'm doing a little too much, but hopefully that makes sense. I think it's really key to understand that. And we do have a page online that goes into more detail. So if you go to the knowledge base, and let's see, we can go to the knowledge base, and there is let's see, bars. Maybe it's under how to make a bar graph. Is that where I have this in here? I know I created this page. Yeah, so perfect. So if you go into the basic graphing section of the knowledge base and look at how to make a bar graph, you can just check back to this to kind of reinforce what I've talked about, where it's showing you here's kind of the bar chart with the categorical axis and the bar plot where the command allows this numerical axis. And this also compares the pivot command, which we will talk about the pivot command next week when we get more into the examples of graphs that talk about that are related to data analysis. So everything we've done today is really is using the commands within DataGraph that are sort of the first few commands that are in this list. So the plots, we didn't really talk about the points, but there's examples there, and it works very similar to the plot command in terms of taking one X and one Y column. We talked about the bar and the stocks, a little bit about the lines. Again, the connect is also very useful for a lot of different things. But next week, we'll focus more on the commands that you see here, and again, how to easily make some examples with these commands in particular that do all sorts of calculation, summary, the scalar field, the histogram, the box plot, for example, can do box plots, points, violins, all sorts of different things. And I guess the one I did not mention that is also in the online examples in the basic section that was one that we added that I thought was useful to put in here. This is an example on drawing functions. So this uses the function command. There's no data in this. It's just literally drawing a function by typing it into this command, and then it will draw that function. So that's kind of a handy command to realize that's there. Sometimes I know in the past I've done work where I've needed maybe a reference line for just y is equal to x and had to sort of manufacture data to do that. Here you would just add a function command that would put that in here. So if I wanted just that line, I can just put in the function command that has that line in it. So you can draw, this is actually another way to draw lines that doesn't even require data, that lets you go ahead and put different functions in there. And you can use the built-in functions. There's also a link here to the function reference if you want to check that out if you haven't really explored that yet. And just some different styles of drawing some functions here. I guess one thing that's sort of handy is using the tokens for these, because this has a token that's in the title field that's connected to whatever function you're entering here. So if I change the function, so let's just make this cosine, for example, it updated everything. So I think this is very handy if you needed to, kind of explore this and wanted to, be able to do this very interactively. This token is just added here to the title. It's also what is by default in the legend name for these for this command. So this file explains that, and it's very easy to add. So if I actually just go back to the first one, for example, if you wanted the function name that's that I've typed in to be shown within the title, or a text command or some other label, you just click on this plus symbol. That will show you a list of what's available. And here it's showing me this exact, command sign X. And if you click function, hit return, now the title's there. It's very tiny right now because the font here is small, but I can make that bigger. And within this is the canvas settings. If you expand this, there is a way to scale up just the title so that the font is a little bit bigger than everything else. So that's kind of a handy shortcut to be able to do that. Okay, so I think we'll go ahead and end for today. And as I said, next week, we're going to get into more detail, talking about the commands in particular that are in the analysis section. And we really, as I said, we're going through a lot of these files and trying to update them and add more information. If you have examples of things that you think would be useful for us to put in here, maybe something specific to the field you work in, some type of a graph, then happy to think about that. And any other suggestions, we certainly appreciate that. A lot of that really is more when we get into the custom section, where these now are combining commands in various ways and doing more sophisticated things, as well as the layout. So anyway, thanks again, everyone. I hope you have a nice weekend.